So how hard's your life right now? Imagine some people sitting here are going through a very hard time. And I think all of us can look back on our lives and think of times that were significantly hard, that we had to endure. How much do you hold on to those times when they're gone? Especially if the suffering was serious. You may forgive, but there's pain that can linger and cause pain and color how we view the universe. And talk about Joseph today and how he acted. He's a really remarkable character in Scripture because he seemed to bring a kind of peace and an ability to move on past hard times that I think very few of us readily achieve. I want to think about Joseph's life for a moment, and I want you to think about through this life how little he did that was problematic, and despite that, had a bunch of things happen to him. His mom died when he was very young. He was his father's favorite, and because of that, his brothers hated him. He had 10 older brothers, and they wouldn't speak peaceably to him. He was given visions by the Lord. And when he told his father and his brothers, they mocked him. And they rebuked him for telling them what God had given him. Then his brothers had a conversation about whether they were going to murder him or not. And instead, they sold him as a slave in Egypt. He worked really hard as a slave for Potiphar, and he rose to a position of prominence. But then when he wouldn't sleep with Potiphar's wife, when she asked him, she lied about him, and he got thrown into prison unjustly. He worked diligently there, and he became the chief assistant to the prison guard. And then when he helped someone, that person forgot him, and he languished in prison for years after that. And then he eventually rose to prominence in Egypt after interpreting Pharaoh's dreams. Now, in the modern era, we would expect people to spend years in therapy recovering from the trauma of those first 30 years of life, including 13 years as a slave and a prisoner. Joseph seemed like he kind of moved through that relatively quickly. He was able to leave the past behind, and in fact, he counted it as a blessing that he was able to let go. And one of the ways he did this is he named his first son Forgetfulness. Manasseh literally means forgetfulness. Now, if you think about it, naming your son Forgetfulness is a bit ironic because it just begs the question, well, what are you trying to forget? It's like saying, don't think about a pink elephant. You can't do it. And his name, Manasseh, means forgetfulness in the way that faith or charity, which we name children after, mean exactly what they say. It's not some hidden meaning. You all know what your name means in ancient Gaelic or something like that. It's not one of those. So it was really front and center. I'm trying to forget. Well, what am I trying to forget? Certainly wasn't trying to forget what happened, because naming his son Forgetfulness is a reminder of what happened. Wasn't he trying to forget the pain, the grief, the sadness, the betrayal of those events? He was trying to let go of the past and to live in the present. And living in the present doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It's about seeing the present joy here that mitigates what did. Remembering it in the context of present joy. How many times have you heard women after childbirth say, I'm never doing that again, only to have a child a short time later? And the Lord specifically speaks about that in the Gospel of John, where he says, a woman who is in labor has sorrow because her hour has come. But as soon as she's given birth to the child, she no longer remembers the anguish for the joy that a child has been born into the world. Therefore you now have sorrow, but I will see you again, and your heart will rejoice, and that joy no one will take from you. There's no value in dwelling on the pain of childbirth. And no sane person forgets that it happened, but they instead focus on the child that made that challenge worth doing, and then actually maybe worth doing again. That's the pulling together of things that make moving on work. We're told that for the angels, the past and the future don't exist for them except in the present. They don't think of the past, they don't think of the future except in the present. So dwelling on the past only to grieve for it serves no purpose. But grieving for the past so that you can live a healthy life now, well, that's a completely different thing, isn't it? And being aware of the past so that we can protect ourselves in the future, that's also in the present, enabling us to make wise use of what has happened to us. And I think in the past, I think for all of us, we spend time just licking our wounds at times, harboring resentments. And when we do that, we inevitably end up, creating more resentments for the future, don't we? Creating more worries for the future. On the other hand, have you ever had this experience? You're upset and resentful about something, and then something distracts you from that, and you have a fantastic time, and then you remember, oh yeah, back here I was being bitter and resentful, and you have to decide, do I want to go back to that, or am I going to keep this happy state going? Because it's a choice, isn't it, what we dwell on. If we ignore the past, we don't learn from it. But if we dwell on things too much, we get stuck. One of the blessings that the angels have is that they don't remember things that aren't connected to their hearts. And so what they're able to do is when something comes up, because they do, we're told, have a more perfect memory than we do. When something comes up, the question that they're asking is it useful in my present to deal with this? If it is, well, then it's worth addressing because it has present value. Isn't that a useful tool for us? Is this useful? So the question to ask is, how is this helping me accomplish something today when it comes up? Is it pointing towards joy and peace, even if it's a rocky road to get there? Now, that's not always easy, right? Sometimes we're the source of the pain in our lives. Sometimes it's just really hard to get through it. And I want to take a little bit of a side route to a possible solution there, and that's by looking at the inner meaning of the story of Manasseh and Ephraim being born. Because as I was reading about, Manasseh is a symbol for a new willing, where instead of making ourselves do something that we don't want to do, we actually come to want to be a good person. And Ephraim is a desire to understand truth, not a grudging willing. So we decide we want to become better people. We decide we want to say, here's the truth, I want to live it. I want to be more honest. I want to be more compassionate. I want to be more brave about doing what I must. I want to forgive. And when we decide that, the reason we're making that decision is there's this part of us that doesn't want to do this, that hasn't done this, that has actually taken a bit of delight in doing the opposite. And so we're making a choice to move in that direction. And that threatens the hellish spirits with us, and they attack. And that's being described in Joseph living a blameless life and having the series of negative things happen to him. That hardship that seems to drag on is what our spiritual lives can feel like at times. It seems so unfair, doesn't it, that here I am trying to be a good person and it makes my life harder, and yet doing the wrong thing feels like that's easy. It takes no effort. There's no pushback on that. But spiritual life is about asserting values, right? And it's as if we're being asked the question, well, you said you want to do this thing. Do you really want it? Or do you just want, a quick fix? If you really want it, you're going to stick to it. And that's why hardships seem to endure. And it can lead to a kind of emptiness and despair. It can lead to what feels like depression, and it can, at times, it might feel like being trapped or imprisoned, like Joseph was. But as we persevere in that struggle, we create a space within which the Lord can operate. And now we start to get the intention of actually wanting to do what's right. So we may still struggle to be honest or to forgive, but there'll be a part of us that actually wants to do it. It's not doing it out of duty, but actually wants to try become that way. That's that new will. And that part is so valuable, the Lord is willing to let us go through the hard times to achieve it. I'm going to read you a passage about Manasseh and forgetfulness at this deeper level. In the original language, Manasseh means forgetfulness, and so in the inner meaning, a removal is meant. That is to say, a removal of evils, both those are of one's own doing and those which are hereditary. For once those evils have been removed, a new area of will arises. This new will comes into being through an inflow of good from the Lord. Such an inflow of good from the Lord takes place constantly with a person. But the evils there, which hinder and stand in the way of a reception of it, once they have been removed, that new will comes into being. So the Lord, in our own lives, is trying to have us forget old ways of being. And when we can forget the way we used to do it, then something new comes into its place. But it's not necessarily in that order. Sometimes what happens is we learn a new way, and then we kind of look back at the way we used to be and say, wow, I used to do that. I used to be that way. I wonder how I could ever have acted that way. We kind of forget that that person was once us. It seems kind of distant. And just as with naming Manasseh forgetfulness is a reminder, we don't want to, from here, pretend that we had never done something hurtful or that we'd never been hurt. We don't want to pretend that. We just want to be distant from that state of being which could have been that way. And that's part of the Lord's gift in our own personal spiritual growth, is to get distance, forgetfulness from our own behavior. And I think this gives us a clue for partly how we deal with other interpersonal relationships. If someone has hurt us and we've worked on forgiveness and we want to move past it, one of the things we need to be doing is doing our own spiritual work. Because if you're exactly the same person that you were when you were hurt, it's just going to keep on being there. But when you grow, then you get distance from that state, from that emotion, from that hurt, and you can look back on it in the same way that you can look back on your younger self and kind of puzzle how you could ever have behaved that way. So let's look back on Joseph and think, well, how did he get through that? How do you get through all this hard time? One of the things that Joseph did, which is really remarkable, is he always said, I'm not going to behave badly because the Lord said I shouldn't. You know, he was a slave in Potiphar's house when he said, no, God said I'm not supposed to be with you. You're married to Potiphar. And he did that all through the times when he was in prison. He didn't get bitter. He didn't curse the Lord. He said, I'm here to follow the Lord even in prison. And that is an incredible protection. It's an armor that was keeping the bitterness from seeping in. Another thing he did that was an incredible armor is he did his best in the circumstances. He was a slave in Potiphar's house. He did such a good job, he got raised to be, the chief of all the servants. He was a prisoner. He did such a good job that he became, the chief assistant to the prison warden. He could have just sulked because it wasn't fair that he was there either time. But he was in the effort to be useful. And turning to the Lord and seeking to make a difference are both incredible protections. Because of that sense of the Lord's protection, he was able then to move on to name his son Forgetfulness, both as a reminder of the past and a reminder of the present. And if you know the rest of the Joseph story, you know that he wasn't entirely done forgetting the past pain. He still had to reconcile with his brothers, which happened later on, and there was some tension in that process where he wasn't sure he wanted them in his life. But this is the tipping point for him, where he was able to start to move on. After Manasseh was born, he had another son, Ephraim. And Ephraim means fruitfulness. When we are looking towards moving forward and not holding on to past pain, the gift the Lord gives us is to see the fruitfulness in our lives right now. That's what Thanksgiving is about, right? Stopping and noticing the fruitfulness that is already there that we sometimes don't stop and pay attention to in the rest of our lives. And those two interact with each other. We're trying to forget the past, and one of the ways we do that is by noticing the present joy and the present hope. And one of the things that we can do is actually hold those together. Think about a past pain. Think about a present joy. And keep them in mind at the same time. What will happen is that past pain will start to diminish because of the power of the present joy. Because present joy is the Lord, right? What you're doing is you're bringing the Lord into that past pain. And he works his miracles there. And that is a deeper kind of thanksgiving than anything else that we will ever do. To bring the Lord into every different aspect of our lives, and particularly the parts where there has been pain, because with pain goes resentment and bitterness and frustration and depression. And when we bring the Lord into those places, the thing that he most wants to do, bring us healing, he can now accomplish, and that's the best gift that we can give him. The best way to say thanks. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Amen.